Welcome to the Visual Storytelling Podcast. Let's discuss the different flash modes, their pros and cons, and when best to use them. Now, my first photo shoot of 2025 was a personal one. I took the children to Enchanted Moments, which is a trail illuminated by a flood of lights, making an otherwise very cold and somewhat dull walk for the kids exciting and a sensory pleasure. Now, I already knew that there was not going to be any light other than the lights on show. The sun had well and truly set, so no beautiful blues and purples in the sky, just black. So taking a flash was going to be a must. Now this got me thinking. I knew creatively I was going to have to use an alternative flash setting to that which I'm used to using. So thought I'd break down the different flash modes to help you familiarise yourself with the different modes and when they would be best used. So let's begin with auto flash mode. So the effect of auto flash is the camera determines whether flash is needed based on the scene's lighting. It activates the flash automatically if the scene is too dark. Now this is ideal for beginners who don't want to adjust settings manually and prevents unnecessary flash in well-lit conditions. It does, however, limit your creative control over the lighting and can trigger the flash unnecessarily in certain low light situations, creating unnatural results. So this is best used for casual photography in varying light conditions. Moving on to fill flash, or sometimes referred to as forced flash. Now the flash fires regardless of ambient lighting conditions, filling in shadows and balancing exposure. It is perfect for reducing harsh shadows in bright outdoor settings and ensures consistent lighting in scenes where parts of the subject are poorly lit. However, it can create a flat, overly lit look in scenes with already balanced light, and it's possibly ineffective in illuminating distant subjects. This is best used for outdoor portraits with backlighting and overcast days when the subject looks dull or shadowed. Red eye reduction. Now, the camera emits a pre-flash or beam of light before firing the main flash to minimize red eye caused by light reflecting off of the retina. So the positive to that is it reduces or eliminates the unnatural red eye effect in subjects. However, the pre-flash may confuse or irritate subjects, especially in candid shots. And there is a slight delay between pressing the shutter and taking the photo, which again may result in missed moments. Now, ideally this is best used for portraits and group shots in dimly lit environments. Now, red eye can still occur with cameras today, but it is much less common than it used to be due to the advancements in camera technology, and here is why. So red eye happens when a camera's flash is close to the lens, causing light to reflect off of the retina, as I said before, at the back of the subject's eyes. Now, modern cameras, particularly DSLRs and mirrorless models, often have flashes placed farther away from the lens, which reduces that effect. Most cameras, including smartphones, have red eye reduction features, which emit a pre-flash or continuous light before taking the photo. This effectively causes the subject's pupils to contract, reducing the likelihood of red eye. Now, smartphones and editing software often detect and remove red eye automatically during or after the photo is taken. Modern cameras and phones now perform much better in low light and often eliminating the need for a flash altogether. So, while red eye is not entirely a thing of the past, it's far less frequent and easier to fix than it was in the past. Let's look now at slow sync flash. So when it comes to slow sync flash, there are two elements here. There's the rear curtain and the front curtain sync. So let's look at those collectively. So slow sync flash combines flash with a slower shutter speed to capture both ambient light and the subject illuminated by the flash. Now this is the flash option that I used earlier this month to photograph the kiddos and the lights. So, and here's why. So the pros to it are it captures creative motion blur, for example light trails, while keeping the subject well lit. It balances the foreground and background exposure in low light, and that was the key I was using it for, really, to balance the foreground and background exposure in the low light. The cons to it, however, it may require a tripod to avoid camera shake. Now, this was a walk-in event, lots of footfall. I was never going to be able to take a tripod, so that was something I had to bear in mind, and I just adjusted my shutter sync or the shutter speed to accommodate for that. The cons are subjects need to remain relatively still to avoid motion blur in unintended areas. Now again, if you've ever shot or photographed children or animals for that matter, asking them or keeping them still for any length of time is a task in itself. So that's something to bear in mind when using this type of flash. The best uses for this flash option are low light scenes with dynamic movement, so dance floors, car light, trails and things, and nighttime photography where both the subject and environment are important. Rear curtain sync and front curtain sync are both subcategories of the slow sync flash mode, but produce distinct effects. So let's look deeper into each of these and begin with front curtain sync. Now this is the default flash setting. So how does it work? The flash fires immediately when the shutter is open. It illuminates the subject at the beginning of the exposure. The shutter remains open after the flash fires to capture ambient light, resulting in motion blur trailing behind the subject because the motion continues after the flash. The effect of this is the subject appears sharp and bright thanks to the flash, but any motion blur will appear in front of the subject. This can create an unnatural or jarring look in scenes with significant motion, as it appears the subject is moving backwards even though the motion blur is ahead. So when do you use this option? Now this is ideal for static or slow moving subjects when you simply want to brighten them and capture some ambient light without worrying about motion trails. It's less effective in dynamic situations involving movement or motion trails. So an example of this would be a person walking at night with street lights in the background. With front curtain sync, their face would be illuminated by the flash, but the motion blur of their legs would appear in front of their body, looking unnatural. So let's look then at the more creative motion blur, which is the rear curtain sync. So how does this work? The flash fires at the end of the exposure, just before the shutter closes. The shutter opens first to capture ambient light and motion blur, then just as the exposure ends, the flash fires to illuminate and freeze the subject in sharp focus. So the effect of this is the motion blur appears behind the subject, creating a natural looking motion trail that suggests the direction of movement. The flash at the end freezes the subject, resulting in a sharp and dramatic image with motion trails leading up to the subject. When to use this? This is best for scenes with fast moving subjects or dynamic motion where you want to emphasize movement. It adds creative flair to nighttime or low light photography where you want both sharpness and motion blur. So an example of this would be a cyclist at night with a light on their bike. With the rear curtain sync, the light would create a trail behind the cyclist and the flash would freeze them in sharp focus at the end of the exposure. Now this gives the appearance that they're moving forward naturally. So let's look then when to use which. So front curtain sync for ideally portraits where the subject is stationary but you want to capture some background light. General use when motion isn't a key element, and beginners who aren't familiar with timing their shots for dynamic effects. For the rear curtain sync, it's creative shots with motion blur such as cars, runners or dancers, low light action photography to create a sense of movement or direction, and when you want to make the motion appear natural and flowing. So here are 3 tips for both modes. Use a tripod. It's the first one. Both modes benefit from a tripod when shooting in low light, as the longer exposure can introduce unwanted camera shake. Experimentation is tip number 2. The choice between front and rear sync depends on the creative effect you want, so try both to see which fits your vision. And tip number 3 is flash power. Use a moderate flash intensity to avoid overpowering ambient light, as this can diminish the motion blur effect. Let's now take a look at flash off mode. So the flash is completely disabled, relying entirely on ambient light for exposure. The positives of this is it avoids harsh artificial lighting, preserving natural light in the scene and prevents drawing attention to the photographer in low light environments. However, it can result in underexposed images in dim conditions without proper settings on or a tripod, and it's not ideal for fast moving subjects in low light. It's best used for subtle or candid photography where flash could be distracting, and museums, concerts or places with flash restrictions. Let's now move on to TTL flash. So TTL, for those who don't know, stands for through the lens. So it's through the lens metering. In effect, the camera measures the light through the lens to automatically adjust the flash power for proper exposure. It provides accurate and consistent flash exposure even in changing lighting conditions, and is useful for both beginners and professionals seeking reliable automatic adjustments. The downside, however, is its limited creative control unless combined with manual flash adjustments, and may not always correctly balance complex lighting scenarios. Now, this is generally best used for general photography where lighting changes frequently, or events and portraits requiring quick adjustments. Moving on to the manual flash mode. The photographer manually adjusts the flash's intensity and timing for precise control. It gives you full creative control over lighting and allows for custom lighting setups in studio or controlled environments. However, it requires knowledge of exposure and lighting and can be time consuming in fast-paced shooting scenarios. So manual flash mode will be best used for studio photography or situations requiring consistent flash output. So for example, product or macro photography. High speed sync flash. You might see this sometimes abbreviated as HSS. Now, this allows flash to work with shutter speeds faster than the camera's sync speed. So typically 1/200 or 1/250th of a second. It's great for freezing motion and achieving shallow depth of field in bright conditions, and eliminates motion blur caused by slow sync speeds. It does, however, drain the battery faster, and the flash power is reduced, limiting range and intensity. Ideally, this will be used for outdoor portraits with wide apertures or action shots requiring fast shutter speeds. And finally, let's look at strobe or repeating flash modes. So this fires multiple flashes in quick succession during a single exposure, creating a sequence effect. It captures dramatic sequences of motion with a single frame, adds a creative, surreal look to dynamic images, but does, however, require manual timing and precise control. It can be distracting for subjects and drains flash battery quickly. So this type of flash would be ideally used for creative photography of fast moving subjects, for example, sports or dancers. So that was 9 types of flash mode, their pros and cons, and which situations they would be best suited. However, the best used for suggestions are just that. They are not fixed. So if you wish to get creative, go out and push the boundaries, explore and find what you prefer, then I highly recommend you do that. Don't forget to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments so we can all learn and benefit from first-hand field tests. Now, I appreciate that there has been a lot within this episode and you may all be experiencing information overload, but before I wrap this episode up, I will share 2 additional tips for flash modes, and they are bounce flash. So if your flash is adjustable, bouncing it off the ceilings or walls creates soft diffused light, ideal for portraits and diffusers. Adding a diffuser can reduce harsh shadows and soften the light regardless of the flash mode. Now before you go, I'd just like to quickly mention the library. The library focuses on getting the most out of your mobile phone's camera with respect to photography and video. You can find this on Facebook, LinkedIn and on YouTube, and I'd really appreciate it if you would check it out and follow the pages and subscribe to the channel. I've left the links in the description. Also, don't forget to follow the podcast so as not to miss out on not only new episodes, but catch up on previous episodes you may have missed or simply wish to listen to again. It genuinely does make a difference. And until next time, be creative, be inspired, be you.